extended time. How could a society that was once mighty end up collapsing? What were the fates of its individual citizens? Did they move away, or did they die there in some unpleasant way? Lurking behind this romantic mystery is the nagging thought, might such a fate eventually befall our own wealthy society? Will tourists someday stare mystified at the rusting hulks of New York skyscrapers, much as we stare today at the jungle-overgrown ruins of Maya cities? It has long been suspected that many of those mysterious abandonments were at least partly triggered by ecological problems, people inadvertently destroying the environmental resources on which their societies depended. This suspicion has been confirmed by discoveries made in recent decades by archaeologists, climatologists, historians, paleontologists, and palynologists, pollen scientists. The processes through which past societies have undermined themselves by damaging their environments fall into 8 categories, whose relative importance differs from case to case: deforestation and habitat destruction, soil problems, water management problems, overhunting, overfishing, effects of introduced species on native species, human population growth, and increased per capita impact of people. The risk of such collapses today is now a matter of increasing concern. Indeed, collapses have already materialized for Somalia, Rwanda, and some other third-world countries. The environmental problems facing us today include the same 8 that undermined past societies, plus 4 new ones: human-caused climate change, buildup of toxic chemicals in the environment, energy shortages, and full human utilization of the Earth's photosynthetic capacity. Most of these 12 threats will become globally critical within the next few decades. Either we solve the problems by then, or the problems will undermine not just Somalia but also first-world societies. Much more likely than a doomsday scenario involving human extinction or an apocalyptic collapse of industrial civilization would be a future of significantly lower living standards, chronically higher risks, and the undermining of what we now consider some of our key values. If this reasoning is correct, then our efforts today will determine the state of the world in which the current generation of children and young adults lives out their middle and late years. But the seriousness of these current environmental problems is vigorously debated. Are the risks greatly exaggerated, or are they underestimated? Does it stand to reason that today's human population of almost 7 billion, with our potent modern technology, is causing our environment to crumble globally at a much more rapid rate than a mere few million people with stone and wooden tools already made it crumble locally in the past? Will modern technology solve our problems, or is it creating new problems faster than it solves old ones? Isn't the rate of human population growth declining such that we're already on course for the world's population to level off at some manageable number of people? These questions illustrate why those famous collapses of past civilizations have taken on more meaning than just that of a romantic mystery. Perhaps there are some practical lessons that we could learn. What exactly were the processes by which past societies committed ecocide? Why did some past societies fail to see the messes that they were getting into? Which were the solutions that succeeded in the past? If we could answer these questions, we might be able to identify which societies are now most at risk, and what measures could best help them, without waiting for more Somalia-like collapses. Efforts to understand past collapses have had to confront one major controversy: resistance to the idea that past peoples did things that contributed to their own decline. Not surprisingly, native Hawaiians and Maoris don't like paleontologists telling them that their ancestors exterminated half of the bird species on Hawaii and New Zealand. The supposed discoveries by paleontologists and archaeologists sound to some listeners like just one more racist pretext advanced by whites for dispossessing indigenous peoples. Not only indigenous peoples, but also some anthropologists and archaeologists who study them and identify with them view the recent supposed discoveries as racist lies. Some of them instead insist that past indigenous peoples were gentle and ecologically wise stewards of their environments, innocently lived in a virtual Garden of Eden, and could never have done all those bad things. Only those evil modern first-world inhabitants are ignorant of nature, don't respect the environment, and destroy it. In fact, past peoples were neither ignorant bad managers nor conscientious environmentalists. They were people like us, facing problems broadly similar to those that we now face. Of course, it's not true that all societies are doomed to collapse because of environmental damage. In the past, some societies did while others didn't. The real question is what distinguished those that collapsed from those that didn't. I don't know of any case in which a society's collapse can be attributed solely to environmental damage. There are always other contributing factors. When I began to plan this book, I didn't appreciate those complications, and I naively thought that the book would just be about environmental damage. Eventually, I arrived at a 5-point framework of possible contributing factors that I now consider in trying to understand any putative environmental collapse. 4 of those sets of factors, environmental damage, climate change, hostile neighbors, and friendly trade partners, may or may not prove significant for a particular society. The 5th set of factors, the society's responses to its environmental problems, always prove significant. A society's responses depend on its political, economic, and social institutions and on its cultural values. Those institutions and values affect whether the society solves or even tries to solve its problems. In this book, we shall consider this 5-point framework for each past society whose collapse or persistence is discussed. I was born in Boston and had never been west of the Mississippi until the age of 15, when my parents took me to spend a few weeks of the summer in Montana, in the Big Hole Basin just south of the Bitterroot Valley. I was immediately overwhelmed by the Big Hole setting, a broad, flat valley floor covered with meadows and meandering creeks, but surrounded by a wall of seasonally snow-covered mountains rising abruptly on every horizon. 3 years later, while I was a student in college, I came back for the summer with 2 college friends and my sister, and we worked on the hay harvest, I driving a scatter rake, my sister a buck rake, and my 2 friends stacking hay. After that summer in 1956, it was a long time before I returned to Montana. Finally, in 1998, I happened to receive an invitation from a private, nonprofit foundation called the Teller Wildlife Refuge in the Bitterroot Valley. I reconnected to Montana. Since then, my wife and sons and I have been visiting Montana every year, drawn to it ultimately by the unforgettable beauty of its big sky. Montana in general and the Bitterroot Valley in the southwest are a land of paradoxes. Among the lower 48 states, Montana is the 3rd largest in area, yet the 6th smallest in population. Today, the Bitterroot Valley looks lush, belying its original natural vegetation of sagebrush. Ravalli County, in which the valley is located, is so beautiful and attracts so many immigrants from elsewhere in the U.S. that it is one of our nation's fastest-growing counties. Yet 70% of its own high school graduates leave the valley, and most of those leave Montana. Some of the people recently establishing homes in the valley are extremely wealthy, but Ravalli County is nevertheless one of the poorest counties in the state of Montana, which in turn is nearly the poorest state in the U.S. Many of the county's residents find that they have to hold 2 or 3 jobs even to earn an income at U.S. poverty levels. We associate Montana with natural beauty. Indeed, environmentally, Montana is perhaps the least damaged of the lower 48 states. Nevertheless, the Bitterroot Valley presents a microcosm of the environmental problems plaguing the rest of the United States. If even Montana has environmental and population problems, it becomes easier to understand how much more serious those problems are elsewhere in the U.S. The same environmental disadvantages that penalize food production throughout the American intermontane West also limit Montana's suitability for growing crops and raising livestock. They are relatively low rainfall, resulting in low rates of plant growth, high latitude and high altitude, resulting in a short growing season, and distance from markets. What those disadvantages mean is that anything grown in Montana can be grown more cheaply and with higher productivity elsewhere in North America. Hence, Montana's history consists of attempts to answer the fundamental question how to make a living in this beautiful